Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a fascinating and, honestly, kind of alarming dynamic that is probably playing out in the modern workplace right now. We're looking at a 2026 study by Potipiroon that explores the totally unintended and sometimes destructive consequences of performance appraisals. It turns out that the way we evaluate and reward our employees can actually trigger a psychological chain reaction that managers and maybe even you literally never see coming.
It's a totally counterintuitive mystery, right? I mean, you would naturally assume that your highest performing, most valued employees are your biggest assets. For sure. They drive innovation, they boost morale, and they deliver the results. But the data shows us a completely different, much darker side of the coin. Under the wrong conditions, these exact same highly valued employees might actually actively sabotage their own workplace. To really understand why this happens, we first have to rethink how we define talent.
Okay, let's dive into this definition. When we talk about talent in this context, we aren't just talking about what the HR department has jotted down on paper. We are talking about self-perceived talent status. This is an employee's internalized belief that they possess high potential and value. Whether the organization has formally handed them a top-tier designation or they just get a lot of informal praise around the office, they've internalized the idea that they are special. And with that internalized belief comes a massively heightened expectation of recognition and reward. Because they believe they bring outsized value to the organization, this specific group of employees feels they have so much more to lose, psychologically speaking, when their contributions go unrecognized. They are hypersensitive to perceived inequities. If they feel like their unique contributions just aren't being matched by the organization's rewards, their reaction isn't just, mild disappointment. Nope. It is a sharp, profoundly negative response.
Section 1. The distributive justice trigger, when appraisals go wrong.
The real catalyst of our story is the dreaded performance review. This is the exact moment where an employee's internal expectations crash headfirst into the organization's formal evaluation. It is the moment the trigger gets pulled. In academic terms, this trigger is all about distributive justice. Essentially, this is the employee asking themselves a super simple question. Did my merit increase actually reflect the hard work I put in? It's a ratio. They are weighing their inputs, the late nights, the expertise, the stress, against their outcomes, like their salary bump or their bonus. And if that ratio feels even a little bit off, bam, distributive justice has been violated.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how human beings process that feeling of unfairness. Psychology tells us we have two operating systems. The cool cognitive system is totally calculated. If you feel underpaid, your cool system prompts you to rationally negotiate a raise, or perhaps quietly start looking for another job to restore that equity. But the hot cognitive system, that is an entirely different beast. It is driven by emotional arousal, distress, and frustration. It doesn't look to restore equity logically, it just looks to relieve emotional pain by lashing out.
Section 2. From anger to sabotage, the domino effect. The research shows that when a performance appraisal violates an employee's sense of distributive justice, it almost never triggers the cool system. Instead, it triggers that hot cognitive system, setting off a massive domino effect of bad behavior. We can actually break down the blast radius of this emotional distress into three distinct directions. Researchers call these counterproductive work behaviors, or CWBs. First, employees might target the organization itself, working slower, taking unauthorized breaks, or aggressively slow-walking a project. Second, they might target their supervisor directly, petty gossiping, refusing tasks, or displaying defiant behavior. And third, and perhaps most surprisingly, they might target the citizens or clients they serve by withholding information or just being deliberately unhelpful. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds into the evidence from the Thai government study. To prove this psychological pipeline isn't just theory, we can look at empirical data gathered to test these exact behaviors. The data comes from an absolutely fascinating study published in the Public Performance and Management Review. The researchers surveyed 237 local government employees working in sub-district administrative organizations over in Thailand. And this is practically a perfect setting to study this phenomenon, because these public servants are the direct point of contact between the government and local citizens, meaning their behaviors have immediate, highly visible impacts. The methodology here is crucial. This wasn't some generic survey asking employees about their overall vibes at work. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't about general feelings at all. It was an event-based study. The researchers focused entirely on one specific, highly salient event, the employee's most recent performance appraisal and the exact merit increases they received just a few months prior. This perfectly captures the raw, immediate reaction to a specific reward allocation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core findings of the study. Let me walk you through it like a giant puzzle. Over on the left, we have distributive justice, how fair the appraisal felt. The arrows show how a lack of justice flows directly into the middle box, negative emotional reactions. From there, those emotions spiderweb out into our 3 types of sabotage on the right, targeting the organization, the supervisor, and the citizens. But the absolute most critical piece is that box sitting right at the very top, self-perceived talent status. That box basically acts as a volume knob, amplifying all those negative emotions. Before we look at just how loud that volume knob goes, consider this truly surprising statistic from the study. Nearly 42% of the surveyed public employees self-identified as talent. No way, right? Almost half. That tells us we aren't just talking about a tiny 1% elite fraction of the workforce. A massive portion of your employees likely believe they are top-tier talent who absolutely deserve top-tier recognition. So the crucial point is the stark contrast in reactions. When evaluating an unfair performance appraisal, sure, everyone feels a bit of a sting. But look at the difference. While non-talent employees showed relatively low negative emotional reactions to unfairness, those who self-perceived as talent experienced a massive, totally disproportionate spike in distress, frustration, and irritability. Because they felt more entitled to a fair reward based on their perceived high value, the psychological distress of being denied that reward was just exponentially worse. Section 4. The spillover effect. Innocent bystanders.
This brings us to the most alarming real-world implication of this data. I mean, it's one thing if an angry employee takes an extra 15 minutes on their lunch break, right? It's an entirely different problem when this internal resentment breaches the walls of the organization. The data on CWBC, counterproductive behaviors directed at citizens, shows that aggrieved employees don't just punish the boss who gave them the bad review. They punish innocent bystanders. An internal HR dispute over a tiny merit increase literally spills over into delayed public service, a hostile tone of voice, and public servants intentionally adhering to excessive rules just to frustrate the citizens they're actually supposed to help. It's a diffuse emotional lashing out. At the core of all this is relative deprivation theory, beautifully summarized right here. Subjective comparisons, not objective circumstances, drive our emotional responses to unfairness. Think about it. An employee could be objectively well paid, have great benefits, the whole shebang, but if they subjectively feel they are a top talent and they see a peer doing less work but getting the exact same merit increase, their objective reality doesn't even matter. The subjective comparison is what triggers the anger and ultimately the sabotage. So, what does this all mean for us? How do managers and HR professionals stop this sabotage pipeline before it even starts? Well, the study gives us some incredibly clear takeaways. First, you absolutely must ensure that performance ratings actually reflect the real work being done. No rubber stamping allowed. Second, salary adjustments must be inextricably linked to those accurate ratings. If there's a disconnect there, you trigger the injustice. And third, establish strictly merit-based criteria so that when employees actually do contribute at a high level, they are meaningfully and transparently rewarded. It really forces us to take a hard look in the mirror at our own evaluation systems, doesn't it? If you fail to properly measure and reward the people who believe they are your best assets, you aren't just risking losing them to a competitor, you are actively turning them into an internal threat. So, I leave you with this provocative thought to chew on today. Is your organization's performance appraisal system creating talent, or is it secretly manufacturing resentment? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it gives you a totally fresh perspective on the hidden dynamics in your workplace. Catch you next time.